All right, we are recording. Awesome. Um, Thank you. Hello, everyone. I'm here today with Tim McElreath from Discovery Network. And hi, Tim.
Hey, good afternoon. How are you?
Good. I'm doing good. Thank you for joining us today. And I think we met at Alexa conference earlier this year, I believe. And then we got in touch through LinkedIn. And the work that you guys are doing at Discovery is amazing. And I can get I'm excited to sort of jump deeper into that and learn a bit more about that. So before we begin, I'll let you introduce yourself and what you guys are working on at Discovery.
Okay. Yeah, thanks. I'm Tim McElreath. I'm Director of Technology for Emerging Platforms at Discovery. Discovery is a wide range of linear broadcast and digital properties. Discovery Channel, Animal Planet, Eurosport, Motor Trend, Food Network, HGTV, and a bunch of others. So I specifically have been working in their lifestyle brands for the last 4 years, which are Food Network, HGTV, and Travel Channel. And for the last 3, I've been architect and director for their emerging platforms teams, which largely revolve around conversational platforms, voice and chat. So I've been heavily involved in developing applications for Food Network and HGTV for Amazon Alexa, Google Assistant, and Facebook Messenger.
Perfect. And that's an interesting combination from voice and text, because a lot of people are doubling down on voice strategies and then they kind of forget about the text part of it, or they're focused on text so much that they don't focus on voice. How has it been your experience? Did you guys start for Facebook Messenger and then move into voice, or was it the other way around?
Well, we started actually in early 2016. I was an architect for FoodNetwork.com, and we had just begun a partnership with Amazon because at that point the Amazon Echo was really gaining a lot of traction, like a surprising amount of traction even from Amazon's point of view on the adoption of that device. So we had very forward-thinking product team who knew that this was something that we needed to investigate and get on top of and start to understand what that platform was and how it could reach our customers. So we began kind of a research and development team to develop an application for Amazon Echo. Within a couple of months of starting that, that's when we were contacted by Google because they were going along the same lines in developing the Google Home using the Google Assistant. So we had to really think about voice platforms a little bit differently, and how do we build an architecture that can support both and treat conversational platforms as being not vendor specific. And then very quickly along that summer, as we were developing the voice platforms, we were contacted by Facebook to start developing something for their new bot platform in Facebook Messenger. Mm-hmm. So, we were thinking about conversational interfaces kind of across both voice and chat very early on. We developed the voice and the chat platforms independently at first, simply because that was the easiest way for us to get products out the door that year. Later on, we noticed the similarities in the way that we process the intents and the parameters to give responses in a conversational dialogue rather than a VUI. So we're moving more toward building consolidated conversational services that can push responses and intent handling out to multiple different platforms, be they voice or chat. And there's a lot of kind of overlap between the two now. If you look at interacting with Google Assistant on an Android phone, the experience is very much like interacting with a chatbot. Sometimes you can plug in via text, sometimes you can do voice. Facebook Messenger, I know there's a lot of adoption of using the microphone and actually interacting with Facebook Messenger via voice as well. Yeah. So there's the platforms in the conversational space are starting to merge together.
Cool. And before we sort of jump in more, I think it will be helpful for viewers to know simple skills that you guys have built. Like, what kind of experiences that you guys are building? Can you give an example of an app on Alexa, for example?
Right. So the main skill that we've been building is for Food Network, which we feel is the best use case for conversational platforms. Because people eat every day, so it's an evergreen use case. People need to find something to cook, something to feed their family. There's a lot of aspiration around food in terms of taking care of people, taking care of yourself, learning, things like that. And it was a good use case for the devices as well, since the Amazon Echoes tend to live in this kind of space between living rooms and kitchens, which, if you think about us as a brand, is exactly where we live. Like, we're in the living room on your television set. We're also in your kitchen with digital assets like recipes and how-to videos. So how do we use these devices to kind of bridge the gap between people who are fans of our TV shows and people who are using some of those recipes or some of those how-tos that they see on TV in their kitchen. So that's really the skill and the Google Assistant agent and the chatbot that we've been focusing on. We've done some additional work for HGTV. I think we were featured at I/O this year for a new video template that is coming up on Assistant, where we can add metadata to video how-tos to allow users to more naturally interact with how-to videos.
Okay, that's interesting. Yeah, because I think as the voice and these devices are going into different scopes, like your car, your garage, your phone, as you said, the Google Assistant phone is essentially a surface with most of the features that Google Assistant has in your kitchen. So people will be using them differently. So that's interesting. And in terms of, so you guys are basically designing for multimodal essentially from day one, because you started with voice-only Echo devices and then jumped into Assistant, which was kind of multimodal at that time anyways, and then Facebook Messenger, which is completely text-based. So we were thinking that way.
In the fall of 2016, we released the Food Network applications for voice only, because that's what was available to us. We weren't even allowed to catch our breath as soon as those applications went out, when we were contacted again by both Amazon and Google saying that they had a multimodal strategy. Amazon with its first generation of Echo Show, and Google with Google Assistant for Android.
Okay.
So we had to take our existing architecture, it was really designed to deliver voice experiences, and try to figure out how to pivot that to deliver multimodal experiences. And also to understand from a design point of view what multimodal experiences mean and how they're different from purely visual experiences or purely voice or text experiences.
Yeah. So what has been your experience in designing those? Like, how did you move from designing for, like, you've been designing for screens for a while, and you guys have mobile apps, web applications, so you know how to design for those content in really nice fashion with any side of screen. How did you take that learning and reinvent yourself into voice-enabled screens?
There was a lot of trial and error and a lot of workshopping. Like, it's basically information delivery. What does a user expect to get on a specific device from the speech response as well as the visual response? Now, a good example would be on a device that we expect to be on a kitchen counter. We are going to go a bit lighter on the amount of visual input we're going to give on our response, because the user is generally expected to be 3 to 6 feet away from that device. That device is also going to be a bit smaller. And if it's something on a kitchen counter, they may not be focused entirely on the screen on that device. They may be doing something else at the time. So on a device like that, we'll probably put only the amount of visual information kind of necessary to prompt the user on what their next actions are, as well as give them the right amount of visual information that they need to make a decision. For example, if you're doing recipe search, it really does help to see the recipe, to see the photo, and also to get, what's the most important piece of information users need to see in order to evaluate a recipe. Maybe a number of stars, maybe a blurb on who the chef is, or the amount it serves. But most of that information on a countertop device, you're actually going to say to the user, like, here is a certain recipe by a chef, it has 5 stars, so on and so forth. Now, that may be less information than you would give on a speaker. If you're asking about a recipe on a speaker, you're going to have to be a little bit more verbose, because you have to be more descriptive of that metadata. Now, as opposed to that, you could talk about now, right now we're also available on Fire tablets and Fire TV for our, Alexa skill. If somebody's looking at a skill on Fire TV, we can make some assumptions that they're in more of a lean back mode and that they are actually focused on that television. Like people who are interacting with their TV are looking at their TV.
Exactly.
So in that case, we can be more video forward because we're expecting that they're, if they're on their TV, they're expecting to watch some videos. We can also get a lot more information via the screen. A, because there's more real estate to do so, and B, because we do expect that attention is going to be on that screen. Mm-hmm. So it's going to feel more natural for people to scan information on a screen in a TV watching experience than they may on a smaller screen experience like a first or second generation Echo show.
Yeah. And so, if we compare it to the mobile side of things or the web side of things, we had this sort of large screen monitor designs, and then we went responsive first design strategy. Is there something in parallel to that? Like, are you guys thinking about voice first strategy and say, okay, we will design this experience for voice only, and then we'll expand it and say, okay, what if the user is on an Echo show? What if this experience is on a TV? Or are you going from outwards inwards? You're like, okay, there's a breadth of everything we can put on the screen, and then let's start removing the information. Or
yeah, because now there are new aspects to consider when we're thinking about what responsive design means in a voice multimodal world. We start with our designs start with conversation. So instead of just starting with designs from a visual output point of view, what are the screens that we're going to show and how do those screens tie together? We start from a user input point of view. What would a user ask? At any particular state in a conversational graph, what would be the most likely user responses or user requests? And what would be those edge cases that we'd want to be able to handle and guardrail the user to be able to give at least reasonably helpful responses? And then think about the devices themselves, not just in terms of their surface capabilities. What size the screen is, does it have a screen at all? What the resolution, can it play video? What kind of video can it play? But also situationally. There's been a lot of talk about situational design. I think Paul Cutzinger at Amazon just released their new, announced that they just released their new design guidelines based around this idea of being situational. What is the user doing at the time when they're interacting with their device? What is their life context or the situational context? And what assumptions can we make about a device that will lead us to know what the user is doing at that time? Are they in their kitchen doing some kind of work, some kind of cooking? Are they in their bedroom? Are they driving? Mm-hmm. And how do you modulate your response to make it appropriate for not just that device, but for what the user is doing at that time? We don't really design for auto right now, but you can think if you're designing a skill use case that can be accessed in the car, you would be very, as designers and interaction UX designers, you'd be very careful on how you're actually crafting that response in a user who's in a driving mode, because not only is their attention distracted by driving at the time, it becomes a safety issue.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it's a big one.
And you can also think if you have a device like an Echo Spot, which may be a night table alarm clock device. So if a user's in that situation and they're trying to interact with a brand like Food Network, they may not necessarily be looking for utility, how to make a recipe, recipe ingredients and directions. They may just be looking for, video entertainment. They may be looking for inspiration, like, give me some ideas of what I can eat tonight, or give me some interesting facts about food while I'm trying to convince myself to get up out of bed in the morning. And
trivia kind of questions.
Yeah, something like that.
Cool. So are you guys thinking from, it sounds to me like it's some of these devices, situation specific apps can be basically a skill by themselves that live on those devices for those sort of situations. Do you guys think of those as multiple apps for Alexa skill, like multiple skills based on which device they activate that on and access it from? Or is it like one skill, but depending on which device they're invoking it from and delivering the right content?
We're kind of splitting the difference between them. I mean, for something like Food Network, we'd like to eventually get to a point where people don't think of Food Network as an app
Mm-hmm.
or a site. That Food Network is a brand that they interact with, and it becomes part of their digital environment. So that if I'm interacting with Food Network, to look at a recipe on an Echo Show, and then I go later and I'm pulling up their mobile app, it should really remember that context. It should be able to carry on that conversation from the voice first device to the mobile device because I'm in that same application. So the user's really not seeing that each device type is a different application for the same brand. I think the goal will be to see how can we carry user context around wherever they are. Food is a great use case for that, because a journey from selecting a recipe, shopping, learning how to do something, and then actually cooking it can take place over a wide span of time. You can plan meals for over a week. You can plan dinner over a day, and you may need to interact with it on multiple different devices in multiple situations during your day. You could be driving to the store and ask to get the ingredients sent to you via text or via Facebook Messenger, and then look at a recipe on television and then ask your smart speaker to save it to your mobile app for later that day. That itself is actually a great use case for how multi-platform user journey can really be effective. I'm watching Ina Garten cook something on TV in the morning, and I have this impulse that I'd really like to make that recipe. Currently, you'd have to, in order to get that recipe, you'd have to pull your phone out of your pocket or go over to your computer, and you have to do a search. And you may or may not find the recipe, or you may get diverted to somebody else's recipe of the same sort, or you may just forget. So there was no simple way to connect the user to the viewing mode to the cooking mode. But with something like a Google Assistant or Amazon Alexa, you can just say to your environment, ask Food Network to save the recipes I'm watching right now. Mm. And then almost magically, when I go to open my phone later that day, that'll be front and center. Here are the recipes you saved this morning, and you can just continue that process.
Is that something available today, or is that something in the future happening?
That's something that we're actually on the verge of releasing. So okay. We've done a lot of building of standalone multimodal experiences on Amazon Alexa and Google Assistant. On Google Assistant, we do have some connection to the website, because if I'm on Google Assistant on a phone and I select a recipe, it'll throw you directly to the AMP page from our website, and then from there you can save and play the video and do all that stuff. So it's really useful handoff. Mm-hmm. So the Google Assistant experience is really kind of the voice interface to allow for recipe selection, and then we hand off to the recipe experience on our website. What we're trying to do for the multimodal smart screens, especially on Amazon Alexa, so we're going to release this within the next couple of weeks, is we're allowing account linking to your overall Food Network account on the Amazon Alexa device. Mm-hmm. So once you go through your account linking flow, if you're already a user on foodnetwork.com or on Food Network in the Kitchen app on iOS and Android, log into Alexa with those credentials to your skill, and now you can do things like save the recipes on now, and it will show up in your saves collections on some of your other platforms. Mm-hmm. Once we release this gives us a lot of things to play with, a lot of experimentation we can do on what's a really useful user journey between a voice first platform and some of the other platforms where we already have a ton of user engagement. I mean, we have a lot of people who use our mobile apps and our websites. How do we give them some additional functionality that's compelling on the voice platforms so that they can start moving toward the voice platforms? One, because there are just a ton of these devices out there now. It's a channel that a lot of people just aren't utilizing to get in touch with their existing customer base. And we all know from doing voice implementations, getting people in the front door to your voice application is incredibly difficult.
Yeah,
Like
I was going to ask about discovery.
It's always funny working for a company like Discovery, talking about Discovery. Um,
It is.
but this idea of how do you get people in the front door through a voice device when there's no screen, there's no, the App Store experience really isn't all that useful. It doesn't feel that natural. I mean, you have to be able to like naturally think to ask for a certain skill, a certain functionality. And to do that just based on the voice device is incredibly difficult.
Mm-hmm.
So the approach we're going to try to take is not trying to introduce people to the skill as a standalone feature, but bring them in and start to acclimate our existing users to using voice devices for targeted, magical or delightful feeling use cases. Let's say, if I save a recipe on my mobile app as I'm commuting or as I'm wandering around the grocery store, I can then go to an Echo Show device on my counter and bring up that recipe and be able to use it without having to touch the screen, without any friction between that. The countertop device knows about the recipe I saved earlier that day on the other device, and then feature that to our existing users and get them to start building habits. I think the big bump to get over is really getting people accustomed to using voice devices for some of their daily habits. And
yeah, it is a challenge and you guys are also working cross-platform. So I might be using Android device when I'm in the grocery store, and I use your Android app to push information into my profile. And then I'm on an Alexa device. I expect Alexa to understand and remember the context, which right now, for most users, those are siloed information buckets. Like my wife loves baking. She probably asks a lot of questions to Alexa and Google Assistant. We have both assistants sitting in the kitchen, and she keeps testing them, but she rarely ever activates. Like, she would actually find a video on Food Network or anything on YouTube or something, and then cast it onto these devices in the kitchen. Whereas I feel like that's an opportunity that she probably should have and say, hey, I've seen this in Food Network. I have already bookmarked it, while running my errands, and now I want the recipe. And I can see her using that as an experience because the blocks are sort of taken away. It's the seamlessness of the experience that we need to achieve. I think that would be exciting to see.
Right, and from an architectural point of view, our approach is really to manage all that conversational state at a level below the specific platforms,
Mm-hmm.
so that any client platform that is plugging into these services can know what the user is doing or what the user has been doing, regardless of what platform they were doing it on. Mm-hmm. So, for example, we have, if I'm on an Android phone and I've saved a recipe, or I'm looking at a particular recipe on the phone, and I have a Alexa smart screen on my counter, because as a service, we know what recipe that particular customer is looking at. If I have a command that just says, Alexa, ask Food Network to play the video, without specifying which recipe video, just play the video. Because I'm looking at that recipe, because I know that I'm looking at that recipe on my phone, I can just pull up the video for that recipe, and I can be looking at it on one platform, on one device, and watching the same video on a different platform on a different device at the same time. And have that feel very natural and have a very simple command in order to get that.
Yeah. And I think that's where the voice adoption is going to go hit mainstream. I think people naturally want to talk like that. It's like, people have seen things or have referencing back and forth, and voice devices, sometimes these experiences break a lot. And so I want to sort of jump towards the design process from, talking about the strategy in terms of architecting it, but also more or less the conversational experience that you said you're designing a layer below the platforms themselves. What sort of tools are you guys using to design that? What does it look like right now in terms of like the process around that?
The process is a work in progress. A lot of the tools, since we were fairly early adopters, we've developed a lot of these tools in-house. And we're in the process of evaluating tool sets as they come up. The tools around content management and testing and visualizing conversational processes. These tools are maturing, and some of them are maturing very quickly. So we're in a process of evaluating, which one of these we want to select and adopt, as opposed to continuing to roll and maintain our own versions of those tools. In terms of the design process, it's been a very interesting challenge, because for a company, this organization the size of Discovery, we have a very mature design practice. We have a group of incredibly talented designers who work on our, not just print and linear TV, but our digital properties, our web, our mobile experiences. The additional capabilities to build voice and voice first and voice multimodal interfaces, it's outside of their experience, but it overlaps with some of what they're doing, because there is this idea of creating user journeys, and there are going to be some visual elements as well. So we're in the process right now of trying to incorporate people who have specialty in computer-human interaction, linguistics, and conversation design, along with creative people who specialize in conversation. Bringing in specialists from time to time who are people who are actors or comedians or have experience in the theater, who know how to create and sort of mimic natural sounding interactions. Because as I said before, the design for voice first experience should really come conversation first. I've said this before in other places, but I liken designing voice first experiences to designing an effective in-person presentation. If you have slides that are backing up a presentation that you're giving verbally, you really want to be careful about how much information you're putting on the screen as opposed to saying out loud, because you want your user to be focused on your voice and what you're saying, and not be distracted by what's on the screen. But what's on the screen can be a useful tool in buttressing what you're saying, or giving important visual cues to where you are in that conversational narrative. So in terms of building that design team, there is some discussion about which functions belong in more of an engineering context, and which functions belong in a design context. In engineering, there's a lot of work that we've been traditionally doing over the last few years around actually building the language model and how utterances, intents, and entities interact with each other effectively. So it is very akin to doing a data model that is then applied to a Google Assistant or Amazon Alexa NLU, and tested to see how effective the organization of your data model is. And then there's the design side, was how do these conversational flows feel to a user? How effective are they in reducing friction to get users from one point to another, which falls very definitely on the design side of the fence. So there needs to be not just new roles, but new channels of communication between engineering, product, and design to really develop effective voice first experiences. And then there's this other aspect of communication channels that need to be done between platform teams. How can we hand off users from one platform to another in an effective way to build an effective overall experience for the brand across mobile and web and voice and all of the other device types that are springing up looks like every 15 minutes sometimes.
It is. This space is moving way too fast, which is good, which is exciting, which means it's progressing. And I think as designers and as people like building these experiences are getting much better at sort of addressing the discoverability through experience. How do we build the experience that once somebody finds your skill on Alexa or Google Assistant, how do you keep them engaged enough that they remember to come back to it? And I think Messenger had that unfair advantage of having a screen built in, so that there's always that chat icon there. You're like, oh, I've been talking to this brand. What happened? And you can scroll up and down. Whereas in Voice, it's like, I don't know how I got to that particular situation last time. I can, and I've seen people try different things. Like even in our family, like we have friends who come over and they would try both devices and they would hit some sort of experience that delights them, and then they would try to replicate that again next time. They were like, I don't know where it went. It's almost like they disabled it, and it's been interesting to see from a designer's perspective. Okay, how are they mentally remembering that, and then how do we recall that experience back in that forth.
And chatbots are a great use case because there's that additional aspect of bots being social tools.
Mm-hmm.
We did an experiment that's actually still live on our chatbot called Meal Match, where we used the ability to have a bot participate in a conversation. So if we imagined a scenario where we had two people deciding what they were going to cook for dinner that night, which seemed to be a very common conversation that happens. And we had basically a game that allowed the bot to act as the judge for what they should be eating. So we gave a category of weeknight dinner or brunch or something like that, and it would independently send 10 recipes out to each participant in the game, and they would give thumbs up, thumbs down on each of those recipes, and then the bot would then give the intersection or the union or the intersection between like what everybody voted yes on to help them make a decision on what they really wanted to eat.
Nice.
So that was actually a good first step in really effectively using the social nature of a platform like Facebook, which is not necessarily a feature of Amazon Alexa or Google. So to a large extent, you should really look at what people are really using those platforms for, and what the profile of those users are, and what the natural capabilities of those platforms are.
Perfect. All right, so we're going to start wrapping down, but I wanted to ask you about, how do you guys see the future of this space of conversational interfaces for the, I'm not going to call them voice or text. I like to think about that. As you said, it's a conversation happening through multiple channels, but what excites you most in the next 5 years that you're excited to see or would love to see?
What I'm excited about happening is how once we start building these practices in organizations and people who are building new applications for existing brands and utilities, and people who are building new products specifically designed for conversational interfaces, is how the whole nature of interacting with customers via digital interfaces is going to evolve over the next few years. I always like to say that from a design point of view, we should look at all interfaces as conversational.
Yeah.
And just start from the point of view, even if it's visual, if it's speech, if it's text, anytime a human is interacting with a computer, that's a conversation. Mm-hmm. And we should design our services as if they're all conversational in one aspect or another, so that they can then be applied to a particular interface that's appropriate to a user situation, which may be text, which may be visual, which may be verbal. Mm-hmm. And then we could do what I've been describing before, is then our services aren't tied to a particular device type or particular platform. And we can really let the user choose how they're going to interact with us in a particular situation on whatever device they have available at the time that they feel is the most appropriate for that interaction. So that, if I'm in my living room, I could choose whether or not to, get some information via my smart speaker or my TV or my phone. And I'm really asking that same question. Mm-hmm. And the brand or the service is smart enough to say, based on what I'm delivering this information back to, I'm going to make some smart decisions on how to deliver that information the most effectively for that device. So the idea of really, like moving toward this notion of environmental computing, I think really excites me. I think it's going to change the way we design for digital, and I think design just in general. It's going to build new design competencies.
Perfect. Well, that's awesome. Thank you so much for taking time. It's really exciting to see all the work you guys are doing. And I know there's a lot more that's coming out from your team, and I'm excited to see.
Yeah, thank you so much. I appreciate it.
Hi. Thanks a lot.